Today we're doing Bananas Foster. So Bananas Foster is a New Orleans dish that we've been perfecting here at the Rabinowitz house for many years. I got the Neville Brothers playing in the background. They're sort of, for me, the New Orleans band. When me and my buddies lived down there, 1981 to 1985, we listened to a lot of Neville Brothers, Radiators, Little Queenie and the Percolators. These were the rhythm and blues bands that were coming into vogue at the time. It was before New Orleans was discovered, really, as a city of music. For some reason, it was like under the radar for many years. And then, of course, Bonnie Raitt came down in 1981-82, discovered the Neville Brothers and Aaron Neville's beautiful voice, and the rest is history. But it was really an underground scene up until then. And when me and my buddies were down there, it was really a special place because it was before that city really exploded into what it is today, or post-Katrina. But I worked in the restaurants when I was down there. And one of the restaurants that I worked in was a place called The Gaze, which was in the French Quarter, or as they say, the Quarter. See, New Orleans has this kind of funky accent because the history of the accent of New Orleans, that's how they talk. They don't say New Orleans. It's New Orleans in the French Quarter. And that tinge comes, believe it or not, from the nuns that were transported from Bayonne and Elizabeth and Linden, New Jersey, down to New Orleans at the turn of the last century, 1900, 1910, 1920, because nobody really wanted to work down in New Orleans, and they had a huge Catholic population, so they figured they'd take the Jersey nuns, bring them down there, and those Jersey nuns had that tinge accent, and that kind of rubbed off on the population down in New Orleans. So it's a special place. Those of you who haven't been there, once this Corona thing is all done, go down there and get a Dixie beer and visit the restaurants. So Bananas Foster really came into vogue in the 1950s. The problem with New Orleans is that it's not the problem, but the issue that New Orleans had to grapple with is it's a port city. And all of these bananas were coming in from Cuba and the islands south of New Orleans. It's a heavy influence of the Caribbeans down in New Orleans. So a lot of that banana and the banana plantations were getting left out in New Orleans, and they didn't really have a recipe to deal with it. So a restaurant called Brennan's, although there's also that wasn't really Brennan's, it might have been another restaurant, Antoine's, they're not really sure. That's the mystique of New Orleans. Nobody really knows. It's just who kind of puffs out their chest and says, no, that was a Brennan's recipe. Brennan's was a famous family down in New Orleans for many, many years, and they're still there. And they used this recipe to basically get rid of a lot of their bananas that were coming in. The idea with Bananas Foster is you always want to have kind of, not quite fraught, but a couple day old bananas because you want it to be real soft. You don't want them to be hard. Everything in New Orleans really deals with the idea of lots of butter, lots of sugar, and lots of really ripe fruit that go into various dishes. The other thing, New Orleans is influenced by two peoples, really. That's the Cajuns that came down from North Canada, French-speaking North Canada, when the Brits came in the 1730s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and basically made it impossible for the French-speaking Canadians to live there. So the Acadianas came down to New Orleans and settled outside of New Orleans, more in the countryside that they were, I shouldn't say used to because it was a cold weather, but more of the rural lifestyle that they were used to. And they brought with them their music and their instruments, all kinds of great things that you know of Zydeco music today, Cajun music. And again, the Neville Brothers takes their influence from all that wonderful stuff. Here's a little sample of sort of the New Orleans funk with the second line drumming. So that second line drumming is basically comes down to New Orleans in the tradition of the second big influence, which is jazz. And the second line drummers were the drummers who would accompany the funerals and the funeral marches as they started out real slow with the sax and the tubas, trumpets, rather not saxophones, sort of marching music. And then once they got to the burial site, they would of course go pick the music up, and it was the second line drummers that hit that sort of offbeat rhythm during the march and then into the jazz party when they actually did the burial itself. That became the backbeat for New Orleans rhythm and blues. So that jazz and the second line drummers and Cajun music with their accordions and squeeze boxes and fiddles just meshed and melded and really became a wonderful, wonderful blend of all types of really creative music that has been in New Orleans now for over 300 years. So Bananas Foster, let's get to it. I'm going to turn up the heat. As they say in New Orleans, you turn up the heat. You always got to cook in your t-shirt because you see in New Orleans, everything is made to sort of be a big mess. So whether it be jambalaya or shrimp etouffee or Bananas Foster, everything gets heated up with fire and everything else, and the cooking becomes really a great part of your afternoon or your evening, or sometimes even in your breakfast. A brunch is a favorite thing as well. So I'm actually getting texts from a buddy of mine who I spent many years with in New Orleans. And actually the story with my buddy Jeff Lichterman, is that he went down to New Orleans first in 1980. And my buddies up here, we were playing music, and we were kind of getting tired of the Northeast. We had done a year at school, at university, but really wanted to get away and kind of see the world and maybe give a shot at music. So my friend Jeff